Hey guys, back with another read aloud today. Today I'm going to read to you a story about being brave. Who knows what it means to be brave? Okay, I want you to keep that thought about what you think it means to be brave in your mind. Okay? And we're going to read Chester the Brave and see what Mrs. Raccoon tells Chester it means to be brave. So, who remembers Chester and Mrs. Raccoon? What story are they from? They're from the kissing hand. And if you remember the kissing hand, Chester was terrified to go to school for the first time. And so Mrs. Raccoon gave him a kiss on his palm and said that she would be with him with that kiss in his palm. Now, she also reassured him that school was an awesome place to go. So let's figure out what Chester may be afraid of in this story and how Mrs. Raccoon helps him overcome that fear. Chester the Brave by Audrey Penn, illustrated by Barbara L. Gibson. Chester the Brave by Audrey Penn, illustrated by Barbara L. Gibson. Chester Raccoon sat snuggled in his mother's lap. The last golden rays of sundown shone through their tree hole, and his younger brother Ronnie lay curled up fast asleep on the far side of their hollow. "This is my very best time," Chester told his mother, lifting his eyes to hers. "This is my very best time, too," she told him sweetly. "Do you still want me to tell you about the little robin?" "Yes, please." "Well," Mrs. Raccoon began her story, "he stepped up to the ledge of his nest, bent his little legs, lifted his tiny wings, and said, 'I can't. I'm too afraid,' and hopped back into the safety of his nest." "He was too afraid to fly?" asked Chester. "Yes, he was," answered Mrs. Raccoon. Chester looked very worried. He drooped his head and stuck out his lower lip. Did the little robin think it was okay to be afraid? "He thought it meant he wasn't brave," explained Chester's mother. "You see, the little robin's brother and sister flew their very first time, and he thought that meant they were very brave. And if they were very brave, he thought it meant he wasn't." Chester appeared very upset. "Was he right?" He asked his mother. "What do you think? Was he right?" Mrs. Raccoon smoothed out the fur on top of Chester's head. "Well, the little robin's father told him that it wasn't that his brother and sister were brave. It was the fact that they simply weren't bothered." Chester lifted his head and peered up at his mother. "What does that mean?" Mrs. Raccoon laughed. "The little robin wasn't sure what it meant either, so his father asked him if he was bothered when he was eating worms." What do you think bothered means? Bothered means to be bugged by something. If you're bothered by it, it kind of annoys you, it kind of gets at you, it bugs you a little bit. That's what bothered is. "Oh, yuck!" shrieked Chester. "That's disgusting. What did he say?" "He said he wasn't bothered eating worms at all. He said he loved eating worms, especially the big, long, thick, stretchy kind." "Oh, bleh!" bleated Chester. His nose and his mouth twisted and squished together, and his entire body shuddered. "Eating worms would bother me." Would eating worms bother you? Mrs. Raccoon nodded. "It would bother me too," she confessed. Then the little robin's father asked him if he was bothered when he was singing, and the little birdie began tweeting and said He wasn't bothered when he was singing at all. Would singing bother you? It sometimes bothers me. Depends on the day and the song. Singing is a lot better than eating worms, grimaced Chester. I agree, said Mrs. Raccoon. Then the little bird's father told him that being brave wasn't about flying when he wasn't bothered to fly. Being brave was about flying when he was bothered to fly, but found the courage to fly anyway because he knew he must. So what does that mean? So the little bird's father said to him that being brave wasn't about flying when he wasn't bothered to fly. So that means that being brave wasn't about flying when it didn't bug him. Didn't make him kind of nervous and scared. It was more about being brave was about flying when he was nervous and scared and it bugged him and he really kind of didn't want to do it. But he found the courage to do it anyway because he knew he had to do it. Then his father asked him if he was bothered when he was reciting his flying lessons in front of all the other little birdies who nested in our tree. The poor little robin got all aflutter. What does a flutter mean? What do you think? Look at him. He's kind of nervous and shaking and all scared. Maybe that's what a fluttered means. He hopped up and down and flapped his wings just like he did the time the skunk sprayed our tree from down below. The little robin said that reciting his lessons in front of all the other little birds was the worst thing he ever had to do in his whole life. Suddenly, Chester began to tremble. He was nestled deeper in his mother's soft, comforting arms. What's the matter? His mother asked. How do you think Chester is feeling right now? Why do you think he's feeling that way? Reciting lessons in front of the other animals at Owl Teacher's School is the worst thing I ever had to do in my whole life, too, he whimpered. Is that so? Asked Mrs. Raccoon. She gave Chester a reassuring hug and then took his tiny hand in hers and gently kissed the center of his palm. Shall I tell you what happened to the little robin, or would you rather jump on top of Ronnie and wake him up for school? Chester giggled. I want to know what happened to the little robin. Well, the very next day, the little robin's mother tucked one of her own tiny flight feathers into his wing and told him it was for good luck, just like Chester's kissing hand. So, even though he was still bothered about reciting his lessons, the tiny bird stood in front of all the other birdies in our tree and twittered, I lift my head to the clouds. I push off with my feet. I flap my wings and let the gentle breeze take me for a ride. Go! And while he was still afraid to fly, he found the courage he needed and said to himself, I am very brave. Then he stepped up to the edge of his nest, spread his wings, pushed off with his feet, and flew away. After all, he was a very brave little robin. Hooray! Clapped Chester. Look at there. He was nervous and he was scared, but he did it anyway. And that's what being brave is. Do you know what I think being brave is? Asked Mrs. Raccoon. Chester shook his head. I think being brave is about 3 little words. Think, tell, do. If you think you can't, tell yourself you can and do it. Mrs. Raccoon lifted Chester's hand. Can you see my kiss in your palm? Chester laughed. No. Well, you know it's there, and it's for luck, just like Robin's little feather. Little Ronnie over there having a good night's sleep or good day's sleep. Chester jumped off his mother's lap, bent his knees, opened his arms, and yelled, I am very brave. Then he ran to the other side of the hollow and with a flying leap landed on top of his brother. Wake up, Ronnie, it's time for school. Chester the Brave has a speech to make. How does Ronnie look like he feels about being woken up? It's okay, Ronnie, I feel the same way. Later that night, Chester Raccoon stood on a branch at Owl Teacher's school. He remembered what his mother said about think, tell, do. If I think I can't, I tell myself I can, and I do it. And he found the courage he needed to tell himself, I am very brave. Then he opened his hand, and there in the middle of his palm was his mother's gentle kiss for good luck. And even though Chester was still the tiniest bit afraid, he recited his lesson in front of all the other animals. After all, Chester is a very brave little raccoon. So, what does it mean to be brave? To be brave isn't about doing something just fearlessly. It's about doing something even though you may be scared about doing it. It may bother you, it may bug you a little bit about doing it. But you do it because you know you have to do it. So what is something that you are afraid of? Could be something you're afraid of doing. Could be riding a bike. Could be sharing your work in class. It could be even doing your work. Maybe it's reading a book. But how are you going to overcome that fear and be brave like Chester? So it is Wednesday. So with Alveus Wednesday, we talk about some anti-bullying. How could you be brave if you know somebody's having trouble? If somebody's in trouble, how could you be brave? You may be a little scared maybe to go tell the teacher, but it's something that you need to do. So you can be brave and think, tell, do. Think, tell, do. Because remember, as Chester's mother said, if I think I can't, I tell myself I can, and I do it. So, remember, it doesn't just have to be a teacher. It can be any adult that you trust. If you think, tell, do. Those 3 words can help you be brave. And I want you to think of something that you can be brave about today. I want you to write it down and think, tell, do. Okay? Now, you know what I want you to think you can? Tell yourself you can. If you think you can't, tell yourself you can and do it. Go take an AR test.